Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Cuties. Hi, if you clicked on this video and you're upset that I am reviewing this film or discussing this film in any way, please note that I have donated $25 to Rain because I'm reviewing this, but there'll be a link at the top of the description to Rain, so if you feel very strongly about human trafficking or the sexualization of young women and young people in general, then please click on that link and donate. You can do a lot of good just by, just a couple bucks and things like that, as well as below that will be a link to the National Boys and Girls Club of America. It can also help mentoring and after-school programs, which can really be useful against those things as well. I'm just really here to talk about a movie. That's what I do here. I don't talk about the marketing of films, which I know is why most people are upset. So if you are very upset or you're really upset that I'm reviewing this in general, please just click on those links and donate. And there's lots of good mentoring things that you can even do in your area to prevent those sort of things from happening. And I implore you to actually do that because I think that's a lot more helpful than just leaving me an angry YouTube comment. So thank you very much for watching. If you don't want to hear me talk about this, then just go watch something else. And thank you if you do watch this, I guess. Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Cuties. This is really a kind of coming-of-age film, but it's sort of different because it's about a very troubled time in this girl Amy's life. She's, I believe, just moved. They're not 100% clear on things, so I apologize if I don't completely understand certain things, but I'm going to try. There's a girl, Amy, who's a Senegalese French girl, who I'm not sure if she moved from there to France. I'm not 100% on that, but she's definitely moved to a new housing project, to a new neighborhood, to a new school with her mom and her siblings, and it's kind of a trying time because they've just moved, they're in a new area, they're not exactly sure what's going on, and at the same time she finds out that her dad is taking a second wife, her mom is completely overworked, and their situation has drastically changed. As well as she's very much growing up in a very traditional Muslim upbringing, which is very conservative, very much like they're preparing her to, cook and become a woman as she is, going through the beginnings of puberty and everything like that. So they're very much preparing her for adulthood at the same time. Unfortunately, she is kind of adrift because of all these kind of like very dramatic shifts that are happening within her life, which is, I think, one of the things about this film that I find really interesting is, and to sort of stop to just talk about that before I go through more of the plot, and I'll probably talk about a lot of the plot throughout this review, so if you didn't want to see it and just wanted to hear about it, I guess that's kind of what, there's going to be a lot of spoilers, unfortunately. There's a lot of times when I was a kid, or I talked to people, and when I was around this age, she's 11 in this, or 11, 13, or middle school age or so, kids were jerks or would pick on me or anything like that. And I talked to them later and they're like, oh my god, my life was so horrible, like my parents were getting divorced, I saw my dad like hit my mom in front of me, like I saw this disturbing thing and I wasn't sure how to deal with it, and on top of like your body's changing and all those things. So I did actually really like that this film took on that, because I don't think we talk about that a lot in terms of kids media and stuff like that, and the huge disastrous things you can do at that age when going through something like that, which I actually thought was really good for a kind of like low-key kind of indie drama, which Cuties really is. I thought that was really interesting because you don't see that a lot. You see them kind of get a little adrift or something like that, but you don't see them portrayed in this way. Sort of remind me of the Freaks and Geeks episode, actually. I think it's like My Friend Kim Kelly, where Lindsay goes to Kim Kelly's house and we see like basically like what she has to deal with on an everyday basis, and it kind of changes your perspective on her. And I don't think we talk about that enough, really, but she kind of sees these girls at school who are called the Cuties. They're like this dance group, and they're trying to dance and get into dance competitions from what they've seen on YouTube and things like that. She, at the same time, steals her cousin's phone, which is a bit of a misnomer, because I think he would have shut it down, or it would have been shut off by the company or whatever. But that plot point kind of bugs me because I feel like they should have just been like, oh, here's this phone no one's using, you can have it, whatever, that we're going to throw out because there's an upgrade or something. I think would have worked out, but I understand they're poor, so maybe like he wouldn't do the upgrade, he was afraid he couldn't afford it, so he didn't say anything is a possibility as well. I don't know, I go back and forth on the phone thing, but it is a little bit of a loose thread in my mind. But she gets this phone and has access to see like what dancing routines are and things like that, but she kind of gets ones that she are not age appropriate for her whatsoever, and of course she doesn't have an adult that she can show this to and go through with or explain, and because kids don't want to do that anyway, they kind of get into these like hyper-sexualized dance moves without really knowing what they're doing as she gets more and more involved in them, and it means a lot to her because it gives her kind of a sense of belonging and fun that she doesn't really have at home, since she's trying to help her siblings and having to deal with her mom who's never there and completely overworked, as well as dealing with the fact that her dad isn't there and is marrying a second woman, and it's like clearly bothering her mom tremendously. And not to get into more of it, but I do think this character, the character of Amy, is interesting because as much as you can tell she's doing pretty awful things, there's a lot of times, I think there's a part later where she does something pretty bad to somebody, and at first I was like shocked while watching. I was like, oh my god, like that's horrible. But at the same time I was like, why don't you just keep walking though? Let's not get caught. I mean, at the same time, what you did is bad, but let's, like, you almost got away with it. You really empathize with her, and because she is in a really horrible situation, between the fact that, like, I think her mom's feeding them lunch or dinner and just collapses out of exhaustion. There's like this room they can't go in that I'm 100% not sure what the deal is with that, which is super confusing. I don't know what that room was for, actually. I'm kind of confused about that. But this film isn't I'd say the most amazing indie drama I've seen in my life or anything like that, or even I think one of the better films of this year. It is a very good movie, but I think what works about it is it gets the core of the emotions of this character, who's someone who's really adrift, and kind of trying to figure themselves out. And I think, when you're a kid, you can go into like these weird pocket things because you're sort of, you have your own agency, you have your own identity, but you're not exactly sure what to do with that. And you can kind of go into weird avenues that when you're older, you're like, oh my god, that is like not what I should have been doing at all. She does kind of get off the rails. I think she grew up in this traditional Muslim background, and she's definitely breaking away from that because that background is very much accepting her father's second wife, which is definitely upsetting to her, and especially because it's like basically destroying her mom, who's super exhausted. And I think that idea of family is coming apart to her. There's a scene early on in the film where she makes this kind of nice kind of tribute to her mom and her family on her mom's bed, and her mom's so tired she just pulls the sheets back and knocks it over and like doesn't notice. And that's like, that really hurts because she like loves her mom, and like that means a lot to her. So I think having that all unravel adds to this. One of the things this film does really well is kind of capture, her perspective, and how, like, she really wants to be with the cool fun kids, like not to think about this anymore, to like, which I think people do with like everything from video games to movies to making videos to, and making TikToks, whatever. Because she's not really set up in a certain way, she kind of like really goes off. She does some insanely inappropriate things. I'm very glad I didn't have Instagram and Twitter and stuff when I was a kid. That just didn't exist. And I feel bad for her. There's certain things she does that I'm just like, oh my god, like just very shocking. But I think it is the point of this film, and I think the sad thing about this age for kids is there's not a lot of stuff that people make. There's like stuff made for kids. There's not things that are real, the honest depiction of that. And I know so many kids who would like go to these extremes and do something inappropriate. There'd be all these rumors about them, and later I'm like, oh my god, that's like such a cry for help. Like they needed someone to listen to them, or they're just in an awkward place, and it might be inappropriate or be hard to actually show those sort of things in a movie because obviously doing those things like are triggering and will be used as kind of material for pedophiles and things like that. But at the same time, that's part of someone's life. That's an honest part of someone's life that should be addressed. And I don't know if there's a real middle ground to that. I think this film tries to do it for the most part. I think it does it pretty well. It might be a better thing to do with animation than use like real people who are underage and stuff. That probably would work better. I find Big Mouth not a great thing, to be honest, either, but maybe a different approach than that. What's going on with the Cuties and her dance crew? Like, I wanted to be in the cool group. I was in a group that people considered a cool group, and I understand that whole dynamic and like what that represents. And I think seeing that is like part of it, because most of the time cool groups, I remember kids talking about like what bullshit nonsense high school drama parents divorce thing like made them want to be in a clique of kids. I definitely remember that. So showing her perspective and how she came onto that, I think is really meaningful. I've heard a lot of people say this is similar to the Judy Blume books. I don't know those like at all. I've never read one. I'm aware of them, and the idea of them, but I don't know them. But I like that it kind of confronts this age 11 or opening womanhood or puberty very directly, because I find that age to be really confusing for kids. But at the same time, I wonder when you make these things, because I don't know many 11-year-olds will even be allowed to watch this. It's kind of those weird areas where like you could do an honest film about teens, but would teens be allowed to see it? But you're still showing something that honestly happened, and it's like you get into this weird artistic area, but which I understand how people get really upset about that. But I'm like, but you shouldn't like let, you know, a few years of your life not be allowed to make art or cinema about, because that's, you know, an experience that could help someone out. So, and I think if, you know, you had a kid who was really troubled or something, this film would actually be helpful, because it sort of asks questions and doesn't really answer them, but I think it does it in a more helpful way that gives you something to relate to, because she is still a kid, obviously, but she is still interested in, you know, more grown-up things. She's being told she has to grow up by, like, the religion that she's being born into, but she still wants to, you know, jump rope and things. She still wants to play with dolls. She still wants to, you know, play with her little brother and eat candies and things like that. But she also, you know, wants to dance. She's obviously having more sexual feelings for the first time and stuff, and that's not something that she should necessarily, like, deny herself or deny those experiences. Those are things that you should, you know, be able to experience and understand at the same time. Just because those are going on and you're younger doesn't mean, you know, you suddenly, those feelings are wrong or bad or something like that. She definitely pushes them in a very wrong direction in a lot of times, but if you have the right kind of appropriate guidance, I think it can be a lot more helpful and you can understand that better. But that clearly wasn't going on, and she was very much in a really, kind of very troubling time. Just a good little French drama. And one of the things I actually sort of like about this whole controversy is, I was thinking, current film Twitter and cinephilia and stuff doesn't really talk about movies like this anymore. Like 10 years ago, this would be an indie film that would get a lot more coverage, because indie films and small foreign films would get that kind of coverage. And that I actually found nice. It was, like, kind of cool that this is this is like a small movie that we're gonna all talk about. Was that I liked about it, because I used to get to watch more of these by reviewing current releases, and you don't get to, and I kind of find that to be a shame. So I hope, like, this gets people more into stuff like this. I don't think it will, based on the reaction to people. What I do like about films like this is it just kind of lets you sit with the character and understand them, and as problematic and as strange and this hard time as their life is, and it makes you kind of think about other issues. And this made me think a lot about, like, media that's made around this stuff, how honest it is, how you know, most stuff made for kids is very overproduced and not really any sense of reality. And this is a completely different thing. And I think in a theory level, and the fact that there aren't too many things made of this is actually really fantastic, because we should kind of have more stuff like that, not specifically with, you know, the twerking and things, and obviously it's showing, like, that was wrong, but it's also kind of confronting this idea of, like, that early adolescence where you're not sure if you're a kid, you're not sure if you're a grown-up yet, or something like that, and it's like this weird in-between, and you're not sure which way to go. And I think this film is just, like, pointing that out, and I found that to be actually really helpful. It sort of reminds me of something like Welcome to the Dollhouse, which no one really argued about that film at the time, but that is way worse stuff, maybe. Well, and I actually really like Welcome to the Dollhouse, because it's a little more honest about that period, about how kids are and things they'll say and things like that. So I don't think most people would probably use this for the things people are saying they are. I don't know that world whatsoever. A lot of kids do dance, and a lot of kids watch, like, either TikTok or YouTube and get those images. And I like that this film actually does kind of try to talk about that, and try to talk about, like, they shouldn't have been doing that, but that's also the reality of that, you know, this girl, her mom is working constantly to the point that she's passing out. The other girl, the main girl who she's friends with, her parents are working at a restaurant so much, and they're basically sleeping during the day, which they illustrate. They're kind of like these lost kids. When you have these latchkey kids, and I was like that growing up, but mainly just watched Robotech and stuff. It wasn't as exciting as this movie, but I knew kids who would get into that, and it kind of shows, like, the problems with kind of modern society and parenting and kids, and how they kind of find themselves and things like that. And I think that, you know, again, this film addresses a lot of things that probably should be addressed more. Like I've said a lot of times with this whole thing, is, like, a lot of people get outraged, but there's not a lot of people who are helping mentor these kids, or starting after school programs or things like that. And I think that's maybe, you know, more of what this is addressing, like, okay, this is how it is. And the fact that just bringing up how it is upsets so many people maybe illustrates the whole hypocrisy in this whole situation that should maybe more be addressed than just addressing the problem. I think this film is really great at addressing the problem and, like, talking about something that we should probably be having a conversation about. But when you start that conversation, there's kind of an answer that sort of nobody's really addressing, and it's really the whole problem this whole time. But I do really like the idea of kind of bringing this up and talking about this more, because there aren't enough really films about this sort of thing. Certain kids will be able to watch this. I'm sure there's kids who now will hear about this when they're 11, won't be allowed to see it, and then, you know, when they're 15, 16, be surprised at how much it illustrates things that they were going through. So I think this film will actually be really helpful, much how I've seen that through films like all the films that Marty influenced, a big kind of character-driven. It was an American Hollywood film, but it ended up influencing a lot of foreign kind of character dramas as well, and I always felt really connected to those films, and I think that kind of helps. It's nice to see, you know, your own experience on screen, especially mainly people of color and Senegalese culture as well. So I like this movie. I don't think it is maybe the greatest drama in the world. It does get a little metaphorical, which is interesting in odd places. Kind of shows you kind of the big imaginations as kids, as well as being, you know, metaphorical and strange. The way often, you know, foreign and European films often are, which I quite liked. I like the idea of like this ghost that's like constantly bothering her, these visions that are tormenting her, the idea that she's not sure where to go and figuring things out. I thought that illustrated that pretty well, but it kind of sometimes came a little out of nowhere. This is this director's first film. Her name is, I don't know how to say her name, but it'll be down there. Apologies. I will just butcher it. So apologies there. But I think she has a strong background, and especially she got character, she got the emotion. Like the strong part of this movie that's supposed to resonate works very well. There's sort of like some fringe details, and like the phone thing I go back and forth on, because I'm thinking maybe he wouldn't say anything because it would cost money and he's working all the time and he's just like whatever. But I think he would have asked them to cut off service, but maybe she's using Wi-Fi. I don't know. It's not important. There are sometimes they like mention things that were either cut out or they didn't have time to film that were a little like, maybe you should have done that or referenced it a little more. But other than that, they're just very minor things. I would not be surprised if we're hearing from this director in a couple of years, just based on like how good they are at character and explaining that character and explaining like points of view. I know this is a very personal film for her. It's like a small indie French movie. It's, you know, kind of like a film that would play at the art house. I think it is fairly good at what it's trying to accomplish and what it's trying to do and what it's trying to talk about. I thought it was very appropriate and a pretty good movie. You know, I don't think it is going to make my top 10 list or be like a resonant film. I don't think it was trying to be like this big defining thing. I think it's kind of been pushed onto this. It'll probably live on a little longer than people think it will because it has that emotional resonance with it. It can hold up to all the controversy. It's not just some stupid movie or something like that. And it's more than just being the little kid twerking movie, because that's not really in most of it. They don't show that a lot of the time. They show how they're obsessed with like dancing with their butts and stuff, but that's also modern dance, what they set up appropriately and understand. And, you know, kids sometimes and emulate what's going on. And if you have a problem with that, find a way to mentor more kids so they're not understand the full context of what's going on, which I don't think obviously these kids did, which is the point. That's the point. The point is to bring this up and to talk about it, and maybe we should talk about it in a much more appropriate way, which would be, I think, a lot more helpful. And I think this film is trying to push it more into that direction, regardless if people want to misinterpret that point and make it the opposite. And regardless of everything that's going on, I think this film at least makes that point in a very strong way. So if you've seen Cuties and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.